What thoughts were running through your head when you realized your business failed? 20 million business with a 3.2 million into debt.
Hmm. I like to reframe the word failed. I'm not sure if I would have back then. I was a very different person with a lot less awareness than I have now. Um, I tend to frame it as embodied lessons. A lot of like, oh shit, like how did we get here? And then this resounding knowing that it was kind of like, and again, different awareness, but it was happening for me in a sense. There was like this higher purpose to, I'm going to say running myself into this place. I was going to say walking myself, but I definitely was running. So, yeah, it was potentially also like a disbelief, like a disconnect from what was truly happening. But I've always had this like this undertone, this undercurrent to the way I live my life that everything is going to work out just fine. And I'm very grateful for this belief that sort of intrinsically entwined itself into my existence before I even had the full awareness of what it was. But yeah, I sort of knew that everything was going to be okay. I didn't know how, and there was a lot of tears and stress and I guess not that I like to label anything in this way, but anxiety at the time. But luckily for me, I kind of use that to frame the changes that I need to make in my life.
If we don't call it a failure, but just a natural development based on the choices that you made with the knowledge that you had at that time, why do you believe it happened? That you came to a point when you said, this is not working anymore. This is not what I want.
There's probably two veins. There's the really logical reason why it happened and the logical reasons why it didn't work. I grew with ego. I grew with an agenda. I grew with a point to prove. I grew to prove every man that fucked me over that I could make something of myself. And so I wasn't embodied in that. I wasn't, I guess, in relationship with myself, let alone in relationship with my business. So I ignored the signs. I ignored the undercurrent of like stress on the business because I was too busy trying to prove a point and try to grow the biggest recruitment agency and to uh, literally just to prove to everyone that said I couldn't that I could. That I actually stopped listening to the business and what it needed, and I ignored the signs and I outsourced my power when it came to financials, and I didn't take responsibility for the things I needed to as a business owner in order to ensure that the whole business was functioning, not just how I felt in the business from an egoical sense. And then also it happened to thrust me into an awakening. So truly, I don't, the esoteric viewpoint on that is that truly everything happens for us, not to us. And I'm very grateful for my capacity to receive help when it came, because, you know, sometimes stories like this end up a lot worse than mine did, and not everyone has the support or the knowledge or the people around them to be able to restructure and sell and, you know, carry on with their lives and rebuild basically. So yeah, that also comes down to my capacity for resilience and capacity to keep meeting the edges of fear and challenge with curiosity and a desire to grow.
Now, you mentioned a couple of emotions that were involved during that time, but what was the hardest emotion to manage and bear and also deal with at that time?
Interestingly, because it thrust me into an awakening, I didn't really have a capacity to feel much in that version of me. I was very locked down emotionally. It's been a process to sort of unwind my nervous system and unwind myself to be able to actually be with emotion. So that version of me likely wasn't feeling a whole lot. There probably was a whole lot of disassociation and numbness and disconnect from what was actually happening. So I would say all emotions at that point, it was sort of all came to a head as I was starting to unlock within myself. So almost every emotion, even joy, was a lot for my nervous system to hold, because I didn't have a capacity before I worked on it to actually be with my joy, be with my pleasure, be with my pain, be with my anger, be with my grief. There was just um, almost like a very shallow existence of emotion, where I only really dipped into pain briefly, or anger or fear briefly, but it also meant I could only dip into joy and happiness and contentment briefly. And I sort of existed in this numbness of achieving.
And at that time, you were also married, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah. It was sort of the end of my marriage and the end of my working career as I knew it.
So it feels almost like it was a simultaneous development of the more you awaken to the connection with yourself, the more you realize what areas in your life are in dissonance with what you truly want or what you truly need as a woman, right? Or you as Leslie, right? So, what made you so sure, especially for your marriage, that it wasn't the right thing anymore?
Oh, it's so multi-layered, this question.
Mm-hmm.
I both, with the awareness that I have now, I don't think I would have blown up my marriage in the way that I did, but I also don't feel like it was the right relationship for me to be in either. I just likely would have done it with a lot more grace and a lot more kindness. There was a lot of medicine in, so I pretty much just came home one day and kicked my ex-husband out of the house and said, I can't. I need space and I need you to leave. I kind of wasn't sure at first. And I'll talk you and I'll walk you through the moment when I was sure, but I just, as all of this started crumbling down, and as I was stepping into more awareness, and as I was actually starting to realize who I was, and I speak about, we often run so fast towards a goal that we're not even sure that we want. And then when we get there, it's like, well, I have it now, but I still feel this like emptiness, or this feeling that something's missing. And so I joke that I've always been a high achiever. So it's like I hit a midlife crisis at 35. I had the husband, the business, the child, the multiple houses, the Range Rover, the designer things. And there was this like gaping, the more success that I got, the more gaping this hole of like something missing became. And I thought the more I achieved, the the quieter it would get, but it actually got louder and louder and louder. And so in relation to my marriage, as I started to feel everything for the first time, and as I started to truly come into relationship with myself and sort of switch from autopilot and like numbing and masking and distraction through working 12 hours and disassociation through working and consuming, and I was 110 kilos at this point, so I literally numbed myself with food. Originally, it was just because I needed space. Like I felt like I couldn't breathe. Like my whole world was coming crashing down. And, I was starting to go into breathwork events and I was starting to really get into spirituality. I was in the pendulum swing. So I was all the way in the right-hand side in the logic and the masculine world. And I swung all the way into the feminine and was just in like full hippie spirituality, like denounced anything that wasn't spirituality, basically. Um, but the pendulum needs to swing in order to come back into equilibrium. And so I was all the way in the pendulum swing, and like the gap between us just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And neither of us had the capacity to, I guess, lean into that conversation. And I remember going to bed the night before one night and like not talking. It was literally like going to bed with a stranger. And even like energetically, there was like this rigidness to how we were sleeping because neither of us wanted to be in each other's energy. And there wasn't any like anger or anything. It just was like being with a stranger. And I guess more so for him as well. Like I was becoming an entirely different person. And I woke up in the morning and there was a lot of avoidant behavior in our relationship. And it was like nothing had happened. It was like, let's just pretend everything's okay. And I'm going to kiss my wife and send her off to work. And everything's bright and shiny. And I drove into work and I sat down at my desk and I was like, no, I don't want to feel like I'm living a half life, and I don't want to feel like I'm not in alignment in every aspect. And, as the business was starting to unwind and as I was starting to realize my life was going in a completely different direction, I just wanted to like honor the truth of who I was figuring out I was rather than who everyone else told me I should be. And so I literally got up from my desk and I drove home and I was like, I can't do this. I just can't. I need space to figure out who I am. And I don't know who I am inside of this relationship. What I realize now is that he was kind of my safety blanket. Like, he's a beautiful man. We co-parent well. And I always have a lot of love for him. Like, he's a beautiful human, but he loved me before I had the capacity to love myself. And that was like probably the only true alignment that we had, was I loved me and he loved me. And I did love him, but I also had an incapacity to know what love was because I was so emotionally shut down in that way.
I love how much depth you have in discerning all these layers that have taken place in your life and being so courageous to also openly speak about it. This is such a joy to listen to, because I obviously realize also and see similarities, and it is so good for other people also to hear a real human being talk about it without any kind of blockages, right? But just being so completely honest with yourself. I feel we are missing that on so many different places and levels, to really be honest with ourselves and also with others. But truly what it means is when you open up to yourself and to the truth that you are experiencing without judging yourself again, right? And this is also what you don't do. You are so comfortable with everything that you have thought about yourself and the choices that you've made, but you don't judge yourself. At least it seems that way. And this is like the most beautiful journey and transition that you can make from being in dissonance with the world that you have chosen for yourself and have lived for so many years until you felt like so stuck, and then finally open up to a harmonious kind of life and like seeing yourself and also forgiving yourself for certain things that you may have done, right? I see a lot of people not being able to make that transition healthily. They start to blame themselves. They start to shame themselves. Oh my God, why did I do this? That was so stupid. And they kind of tear themselves down to the ground. And from that ground, it is so much harder to actually pick yourself up. And for some, it is even impossible, right? And you were also, as you mentioned, going through different levels of struggles with weight gain, which I also know is a challenge in itself for many, many women who have emotional eating, for example, right? Who don't know how to regulate that. And it is such a multi-layered thing that we are going through on a daily basis in this life, and it's really beautiful to see a human being just reflecting in such a genuine way. And if I think about your time now, kind of going away from your marriage, really waking up to your true self, and you had a kid, right? And you had to take care of that as well. I would like to know what was the biggest challenge that you faced as a single mom, because I'm a single mom and I'm sure we have lots of single mom listeners of this podcast as well.
Honestly, it was allowing myself to be all parts of me without shame. And I love that you reflected back to me this capacity to be with my experience without shame, because, I say to people all the time, society wants to label us with shame and guilt and blame, and they're the shackles that keep us bound. And if we can be with ourselves, and it's actually my son's been one of my biggest teachers. The way that I parent him, so I would say I like soft parenting, as conscious as I can be until triggers arise, like we're all only human. But he's really been one of my biggest teachers, because I started to notice the way that I parent him, I wasn't applying the same grace to my little girl. I wasn't
Mm.
applying the same level of love and understanding. And as I was reparenting myself in this experience in life, I would notice that I was much harsher to me because I was a grown up, but I have an awareness and I've studied all of the modalities that a lot of the time we're actually responding from our little girl and not from our woman. So I sort of have a relationship with all parts of me, but I sort of group them in my woman, which is my mature part that is conscious in the decisions that she's making. And then our subconscious is tends to be made up out of our younger selves, like from childhood through to teenage years. And so, yeah, just to loop back into the child thing in that, the way that I don't carry shame or guilt is because I would never expect my son to carry shame and guilt for lessons that he's learning. And when we're reparenting ourselves, we have to remember that we're not speaking to the consciousness that sits in front of us right now. We're actually speaking to that exiled part or that wounded part. And if we can speak to that part and we can be with that part with love and grace and compassion, then we can evolve into wholeness. But if we pile on shame and guilt and blame, then it's just going to remain exiled out of our consciousness and it's going to act out in subconscious ways. And so whole self-healing is about not only reparenting, but helping those parts mature to realize that like there is a grown woman here that has life experience that can sort of navigate us into more love and not steer us towards fear or whatever we're trying to keep ourselves away from. There's a whole other conversation. But in relation to mothering, it was the permission piece to be both mother and maiden. And truthfully, co-parenting, has been one of the biggest blessings for me because it really allows me to be with all parts of myself. So I can, and again, my ex-husband is a beautiful human, and I'm so grateful for our relationship and the way that he shows up in fatherhood because I can go to America for 3 weeks at a time, and 3 weeks is my capacity. My mum guilt starts to get a little thick after 3 weeks, but 3 weeks and I'm quite comfortable. I'm quite comfortable to be in my maiden. And it's really important to give that to myself and to not expect myself to shut down parts of my identity purely because I'm a mother. And it's kind of this celebration of like, yeah, I'm a mother and that's beautiful. And I can be so present with my son because I ensure that I honor my full human experience. And I don't expect myself to be a mother all of the time because that is only a tiny fraction of my identity. It's not even half of my identity, honestly. It's I'm with my son half of the time, and when I'm with him, I'm very present. And yes, it's half of my identity in that way. But even when I'm with him, sometimes I'm my own little girl because I'm in joy and play and fun. And it's important to, I guess, like hold this vision of our full selves and not expect us to shut off our maiden or our play or even our seductress or our, sexuality because society told us that we couldn't or shouldn't or it has to look this way. For me, I sort of look at like motherhood and business as a part of my spiritual practice and a part of my relationship with myself, and how can I use them to guide me into deeper parts of myself rather than like chop parts of me off to fit into what everyone else says I should or shouldn't be.
I also noticed that it is quite stiff, that kind of expectation that first of all society has of us, or the way how we have been raised, and how we have observed our mothers, how they have done it in prior generations. It was even more stiff, the role of the mother, so to speak. And we also apply that kind of pressure to ourselves when we become mothers, I feel, because we have a certain idea of what a mother is, and then we have that baby in our arms, and still this idea lives on in the first month, but soon we kind of realize that's not all and that's not everything to it. And I feel motherhood is such a fluid concept or fluid role that yes, in the first month, you are an absolute nurturer, 100%. You only nurture, you don't do anything else, right? And then you kind of transition into a teacher type of person role because you need to teach that child some real skills for life, right? And so you go away a little bit from that nurturing, pure nurture side, right? And then you transition into other different roles. Sometimes uh, you're the doctor. Sometimes you're the sparring partner, right? If especially if you have boys, right? And that's also a funny one because mothers oftentimes think that you cannot fight with a boy, for example, right? That should only dads do, right? Or that's only reserved for between men or boys, right? Those kind of ideas that are quite stiff when it comes to how a mother should be, and I fully agree that these things need to be more fluid. And what I also notice is that women have a hard time transitioning, especially
Mm.
in those times when this certain age comes with the child, that they don't transition, they remain in that stiff role. And
Mm.
the, a lot of frustration comes for both sides, is what I observe. For the mother, a lot of frustration because she cannot be herself. She um, deems herself to that single role, and like the housewife, so to speak, cleaning, cooking, and what have you, right? And that's all that she does, and that's her perfect role of a mother, right? That's the best mother that she can be. But there are so many different layers that she needs to go into to be a role model, right? Whether you have a boy or a girl, I feel. And the transition especially is so horrifically obvious that she didn't make that transition, is when the child is a teen or becomes a teen, when the mother still is mothering, so to speak, when the mother is still cooking for the child, when the mother is still doing the laundry for the child, this is when I noticed like the transition did not take place. And this woman is really driving towards a lot of frustration because she doesn't want to do that all her life until the child is, I don't know, 40, 50, right? She needs to make that transition, is my personal opinion. And it gave me a lot of freedom to operate on that level because you have much more independent children. First of all, right? You give them real life skills.
Truly. And I think for me, it was a case of like, what is everything I'm trying to unlearn?
Mm.
And what is everything I'm trying to learn in attachment? So attachment styles has been a real guiding light for me because I want my son to be securely attached. And I know specifically for mother-son and father-daughter relationships, it's sort of a window into their first love.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I can guide my son to be securely attached, so he knows I love him deeply and he's secure in that love, and he knows that I'm here and that he's not abandoned, and that he's considered and loved deeply, that his chance of forming a secure attachment in love is better. Whereas again with the pendulum, if I smother him too much because I've made my existence about him only and he's my reason to live basically, so I don't give him the capacity or the freedom to be his own human being and to raise him into his own self because I have a level of codependence. If I have an attachment wound that I'm playing out in that connection, then I'm not giving him the best chance at life. Similar, if I swing all the way over into being unattached and unavailable to love him and not showing him that he's considered and cared for, then he's going to develop an abandonment attachment and codependency in how he relates as well. So I kind of look at this like scale of we're never going to get it right. But if I can just aim to allow him to feel securely attached while also developing his own identity, then I'm giving him the best chance at life and hopefully less therapy than I needed. But we can't control anything outside of that. And so I talk about the middle ground often. I talk about the middle way, that I'm not going to give up my identity to be his mother, but I'm also not going to let him feel like he's not considered in the identity that I'm forming. And so I always try to meet in this place of like, what do I desire? And then how do I ensure that he feels considered in those desires and that he's loved and cared for and important and that he's a part of my life and where it's going. And I, I understand that co-regulation is important, and I make sure that he knows that he's deeply loved, and I make sure that he has a sense of identity in that as well. Because if I was to be taken tomorrow from his life in some way, and his whole identity is attached, and it will always be, and I don't have a very close relationship to my mum or my dad. We're repairing it after a very long time, but I never did growing up. And I know that regardless of what my grown-up self knows about not needing them, my little girl still craves nothing but her mum's love and nothing but her dad's love. And I know that to be true in 90% of the people, and I'm going to say 100%, they're just in denial, but everyone desires the love of their parents in some way, whether consciously or subconsciously. They desire to know that they were deeply loved and considered in the lives of their parents. And it's often the repairing that we're doing in that feeling that they weren't loved, or that love was shown in toxic ways, or that, love was conditional in some way. And so the way that I parent is literally by looking at the path I've walked to reparent myself and to unprogram myself from all of these unhelpful mindsets. And I'm never going to get it 100% right. But if I think I can stay focused on ensuring that he feels deeply and securely loved whilst having the capacity to form his own identity, then that is like the best foot forward that I can give him in life. And whatever comes from there is going to happen. And I can't control it anyway. So I may as well be true to myself in that love, because I also feel a sense in motherhood that there's this programming to abandon ourselves in mothering. And for me, that is programming that it's okay to self-abandon to receive love, because maternal love is still a form of love. And if love is truly meant to be unconditional, then how do we sit in this like tension point of unconditional love, even for our child, where they feel like we love them unconditionally and they have the capacity to love us unconditionally? Not I'll only love you if you show up in this way, but how can we create a relationship of true unconditional love where if I want to go to a tantra retreat in America for 3 weeks, it doesn't mean I love my son any less. It just means that I love myself at the cornerstone of every relationship that I have. And through that capacity to love myself, I have even more of a capacity to be the expression of unconditional love. And that's sort of how I navigate my mum guilt mostly. And I mainly only get that from society telling me I should feel a certain way, because I sort of know my threshold when I, and like I say, 3 weeks is generally the point where I actually feel, okay, it's enough for me to have a window of being solely in my maiden and exploring the world. But at that 3 weeks, I ache for him. Like my heart is like, nah, I need to be with my son right now. So that might look different for someone else. And I would never sit here and like, fuck what I say and fuck the rules. Like truly just get to know yourself deeply and be your own compass to what truly feels like truth within your system. Because you'll know when you have a relationship with yourself like that, you know you can be your compass in making those decisions. And sometimes it's just the ability to like block out everyone else's thoughts and opinions and just be with your center and your truth.
Now you've opened up a very big topic with conditional and unconditional love. This is one part of relationships that I have put so much thought into. And there is like one side of people or one bucket of people that would rave about unconditional love. And if it's true love, then it's unconditional. And then there are people who are also respect, who are relationship coaches and so on, who talk about conditional love, that love can only be conditional. Now, I have not fully made up my mind, but what I try to understand is in what capacity can love be unconditional? And there is, of course, the romantic side of it, that no matter what happens on the time and space continuum, the feeling of loving someone and the willingness to act lovingly towards that person doesn't matter, right? This is the type of unconditional love, how I would understand it. Now, when people talk about conditional love, on the other hand, we all are in different relationships. And I think there will be different conditions when it comes to making a relationship work, because it's also a process, right? And I think we might not need to confuse these two different things, how you feel about someone and how to make something work.
So, being in relationship, or the conditions for being in a relationship, should be exclusive to love. And I'll give you an example. I love my ex-husband. I'm not in love with him, as in I don't desire to be in relationship with him. I don't desire to co-create life with him in the same way. I love him. I have so much love for him, and like the being that he is. Recently, I went through an experience where he has a new partner. And so originally, when these conversations around my son meeting this new woman and having this new woman in my son's life came to the forefront, I had a lot of contraction. I had a lot of fear, truthfully, especially given that I don't mother in a traditional sense. I don't live in a traditional sense. And there's a lot of fear around being replaced. Truthfully, as well, there was also a lot of fear around having less love in my life, because me and my ex-husband were just starting to get on really well. And I like the connection that we have. Like, I like our friendship. And I like having a friendship with the man who I have a child with. It obviously makes co-parenting much easier. And so as we started to have conversations about introducing this woman to my son, and introducing her to me, and sort of starting to like blend families, there was a lot of fear and contraction. And so I could have chosen not to meet with this new woman, and I could have chosen to remain in contraction, and I could have chosen to, the way I look at it is like, and actually I got this lesson came to me through a book called Becoming, Asri and Benjamin Becker, beautiful friends of mine. I was going to say lucky enough, but I definitely magnetized them into my existence. I had a retreat with them last year after reading the book Becoming, and actualized them into my life as friends, and spent a week with them in Mexico. But as Ria talks about in their book, what would love do? Without my preference, what would love do? And so, I ruminate on this often. And when I'm in highly emotional states, or when I'm feeling contraction around love, I ask myself, without my preference, so my preference would be that, even though, and I don't, but there is a part of me, my little girl is like, even though I don't want to be with my ex-husband, if he could remain single, so I still had all of his love and attention, because I don't want anything to be lacking from my life. And I don't want to play with that toy anymore, but please don't take that toy off me. Without that preference, without my clinging or gripping or manipulation or control of the situation, if I can be with the love that's still there and ask myself, what would love do? It would to not be to fight, to allow whatever's present in our relationship and his new relationship to be there. And so I went and met with his new partner, and I left in tears, because in that connection, we actually became friends. And what I realized was that I wasn't losing love, I was gaining love. And if I had have gripped to this idea that his love for me had to look a certain way, or there was only so much space in my world for this type of love, I wouldn't have received the gift of more love in different ways, and ways that I wasn't even sure existed, and I didn't have the capacity to grasp. And so when I think of unconditional love, like in relating as a sense, And I think of like friendships that have stopped because we trigger each other too much, or we don't have capacity to hold it, or whatever it might be. We're actually, and I've had friendships end in this way, and we're actually back in friend, like relating again. Even when I wasn't friends with them because the trigger was too much to hold, I loved them. And sometimes that love shows up as anger because we think that we've lost love. And the anger is actually at like the lack of control or the loss of what we wanted or the loss of what we had. But if we allow it to to settle into truth, often it's just love. And, I ruminate on like unconditional love in the sense of if we're loving to receive love or if we're loving for something in return, it's not unconditional. It's conditional upon the love that we like. I will only love you if you love me. It doesn't feel like love or unconditional love in the sense it's conditional upon something, or it's conditional upon us being in relationship, or it's conditional upon us talking. But if we can truly tap into this depth of like, can I love you and can I love life and can I love myself specifically? Because the relationship that we have with ourselves is how we relate with everyone else in the world. And can I love myself unconditionally first? Can I love the parts of me that made mistakes? Can I love the parts of me that might not think I look good in a certain outfit? Can I love the parts of me that just want to eat junk food all day? Can I love the parts of me that just want to cry all day? Can I love the parts of me that want to numb out and avoid the world? And the relationship that I'm coming into with unconditional love is it stems from our capacity to love ourselves unconditionally. And if we still hold condition for the love that we have for ourselves, then we mirror that in every other relationship that we have.
Well, then I can only conclude that love needs to be unconditional, because as soon as it becomes conditional, it's not really love, but it is acts of love, like superficial acts of love. I will give you whatever, like time with me or cuddles or what have you, if you behave a certain way, so to speak, or if you give me certain things. And like love itself, it needs to be unconditional, otherwise we will not be able to grow, I feel. And
Really?
the conditions can only be applied to the container relationship itself, but not to the how we act. It needs to be unconditional how we love someone, otherwise it will not really function. And love, I understand love in a sense that we want the best for someone, and it can be ourselves, right? It has to start with ourselves. If I don't want the best for myself, I don't love myself. And if I am not capable of forgiving myself, I also cannot love myself.
But it also where it becomes really evident as to whether you're embodied in that is if we're talking of like what would love do in the essence of love as a universal frequency. If you're in a relationship that's giving you love, but it's not healthy for you, or it's not conducive to your growth, or it's toxic in some way, and you can't grow with that person to evolve through that stage in the relationship, then in that moment, what love would do would be to leave love. And so that's the essence of unconditional, and like unconditional love for myself. Like, can I love myself standing in my truth and setting boundaries that include I am not available for this type of relationship? And so if we can literally anchor to what would love do without my preference, because our preference tends to relate to our conditioning or our wounding or our desire to be loved. So if we can come back to what would love do without my preference, then I don't think we'll ever be perfect at this, by the way. I don't think it's a game of getting it right. I think it's a game of keeping this as a compass, as I say, of like, if I can come back to this center of like, what would love do without my preference, and rest in this place, then we're closer to really understanding what love is in its truest form.
Yes, and it's also trust, I feel. Just when you were telling me about the new partner that your ex-husband got. Like, we get so fearful when we meet new things that we cannot control and we don't know the outcome of it. It could have been either way. He either could have chosen a good woman for himself or a not so good woman that would just control him and be negative and create a whole lot of negativity for his life, which would could have meant for you that you would have gotten less love from him, or the friendship that you have cultivated could have been broken down by that type of woman. So it was really not something wrong to be fearful about it, but a reality, a possibility, because you didn't know that woman. What will that woman do to that man, so to speak, right? And in the presence of opening up yourself to the new possibility of either outcomes, you open up yourself to more growth, because either way you will grow, right? You, as a friend, you, even if he chose not a good woman for himself, you as a friend could still be part of his growth journey by telling him, hey, I don't think that's a good idea or something, right?
I feel the universe brings us what we need, truly. And so even if she had have been not the ideal like woman, it would have been a lesson for me in boundaries with my son and speaking my truth with my availability to allow him to be in that environment. So I'm very grateful that it's turned out the way it has, and I know that's not always the case. Um,
Rarely the case.
yeah, likely. But again, I don't know. I have this belief that the great cosmic joke is we are in control and we're not. And the more we can heal within ourselves, the more our external world can reflects that. And so, yeah, I trust, I surrender to that. I surrender to what will be, and all I can control is my response to that and how I show up in this new environment.
Yeah, I totally can relate to that type of fear when ex partners get new partners, and really trusting yourself that you will also be able to find whatever is necessary to still feel safe in whatever new thing comes into your life. I think trust is also such a big topic that is a problem for many, many women nowadays, especially in the Western world, which I observe. It is quite important to acquire that type of skill. How, what do I need to do to trust myself on a level where I feel capable at meeting any obstacle that comes my way, and not just melt away with all my emotions and going through roller coaster, which is, by the way, really bad for your heart. And women are not very conscious about that. They just melt away and they cry through the days, right? And they don't know what to do and they just spiral, right? Many of women, at least. And I think this kind of emotional maturity is very, very helpful in not only navigating life itself, but also a business. And many listeners of this podcast are business owners. So they need to acquire that type of skill. And you did certain things, right? Coming out from the learnings of a business that didn't work out for you and a marriage that did not work out for you, but created a new friendship for you. You did certain things to really turn around not only your life circumstances, but also your business circumstances. Can you walk me through what you did?
Woo! Everything. Um, I would say the catalyst to all of it was I actually stopped and started to form a relationship with myself. And I'm going to touch on a few points that you made there. We tend to sit in one of two camps. We're either very masculine or very feminine. And we either, in our emotion and very feminine and can't hold ourselves. It's not about control, it's about holding. And I'll drop into that in a second. Or we're very masculine and we need to learn to soften and surrender and receive and to drop into our intuition and to feel our emotions and to use it to help guide us in life. And so again, with most things, when we come out of one, we tend to pendulum swing into the other. So there, for me, what was true was I built a business on the back of my drive and my determination. And because I was disassociating. I was running away from the mean girl voice inside of my head. So I poured all of my time and attention into my work, because if I worked all of the time, I didn't have to be with myself and I didn't have to be with my thoughts. And so that served me in the fact that I outworked everyone. And there is place for what I now call intuitive exertion, where we're cyclical. Women are cyclical. And so when we're ovulating, generally, we have a lot more energy and a lot more drive and a lot more direction because we're in that phase. And so what I did when I first came out of my masculine structure and was coming back into like feminine-led business was I would shame myself when I overworked, when I worked a 8-hour day or a 10-hour day, when I was really focused and I sat in front of my computer all day, I would shame myself because, that's not the feminine way and it's not what we're taught in feminine teachings. And so what was really conducive to me was actually working in intuitive exertion, or this intuitive flow, where if my body and my soul were like, yeah, we're here and we're in creative flow, I would just be with it. I wouldn't try and bottle it or shut it down or shame it in any way. I would just allow that to flow. And if I noticed this pattern going on for too long, I would start to work with my masculine frame, my discipline, and actually schedule in downtime. And rather than try and, again, like shift out of this like get shit done mode, I call it, I would just create space for myself to receive so I didn't work into burnout or overwhelm. And so coming back to the other side of the pendulum is like women that don't have any masculine or have very little masculine frame. And so I explain this in like, we only understand the power of a river based on it being held by the banks. And if there were no banks holding the river, we actually wouldn't know it existed. We wouldn't know it was there because it would flow everywhere and evaporate into nothing. And so if we want to be in our full expression of our feminine power, we need to have the capacity to hold ourselves in everything that we are. And this can support us in two areas. In relationships, if we're calling in a partner, for example, or we're desiring a more masculine man, and in business, if we're desiring to get further in business, oftentimes we're not giving ourselves the discipline and the structure that we need in order to be in our full expressive and creative self, because our business doesn't flow with ease, because we're in all these peaks and troughs, because we are riding emotional waves that aren't flat. There's no consistency because we're in our emotions. We're actually meant to be expressed this way. But if we don't give ourselves the structure to hold ourselves, now, I'm like one of the most emotionally expressed people I know, but true emotion only lasts 90 seconds. Everything outside of that is actually the story that we attach to the emotion. And so if we're spending an entire day crying about one thing, it's not actually that we're crying about. We love being in the drama and we love being in the story. And so when we can like take responsibility, and I talk about like self-responsibility, which is a masculine trait, it's actually the maturing of our feminine. And we can actually take responsibility for ourselves and our emotions, and we're not acting like wounded little girls, because that's truth. Like that might sound harsh or feel hard, but that's the truth of it. When we can, my superpower is not only that I reparented myself, I also matured those parts of me. And there's a difference between reparenting and maturing, and like letting those parts know that like I said before, like there's a woman that's in control now. There's a woman that's like steering this ship, and I'm so grateful for the lessons and the feelings, but like I'm here and I've got you, and we're going to be okay. And so oftentimes when we're like ruminating in emotion, it's because there's an unmet need in the little girl that's actually running the show in that moment. And it's like a child throwing a tantrum. If we let our child throw a tantrum, they would continue to throw a tantrum. But we're the grown-up, we're the adult. We can help them regulate. We can help them shift their attention onto something more positive or conducive rather than fixating on the story of my mum doesn't love me because she wouldn't let me have an ice cream. So the incapacity to hold yourself in emotion is because often we're not holding out, there is no structure, we're not holding ourselves. And sometimes that comes from wanting to like, not wanting to be with our own emotion and wanting to like, I can't hold it, so I want to give it to someone else. So I'm going to be in my emotion, I'm going to be in my tantrum because I want someone to come like save me from myself and rescue me because I can't be with me in this. I don't have the capacity to actually parent myself in this moment. Because as a parent, and the way that I parent is like I'm with my son in his emotion. I don't cross his boundaries. I don't try and touch him. And oftentimes I'll just sit with him and I'll be like, I'm right here. And when you're ready, like express what you need to express. And when you're ready, I'm right here. Whereas if we're overly emotional, we often need to not only reparent ourselves, but we need to bring some maturity into our internal relationships and be like, no shame, no blame, no guilt. Just like, I love you and I hear you. And I know that not making $10,000 this month was really hard and you want to throw a tantrum, or like that guy telling you that he doesn't want to date you, like, and you feel the rejection and you're feeling abandoned, and like I hear you, like feel it. And so I have a mirror and I have a mat. And so if I feel emotion bubbling, I try to be with it in the moment. I don't try to suppress it. Because also what can happen is one thing can trigger us in the moment, but actually it's bringing up the 6 other times we felt the same thing, but we didn't allow it to be expressed. So anytime I feel a trigger or I feel an emotion, I will immediately, if I can, try and take myself to my mat and I'll sit in front of my mirror and I'll put my hand on my heart and I will literally say to my little girl, myself, I'll be like, what's here? What do you need to feel? And I will let her have that emotion in the moment. And then I don't like bank my emotion. So then when I feel really deep, painful emotions, I'm not like grieving the 6 other times that it happened. I'm actually just being with what's here right now, and I can allow it to pass like that. And sometimes it takes 20 minutes, sometimes it takes an hour, sometimes it takes 5 minutes. Sometimes I breathe and I like cry and I'm like, oh, that's all I needed. And I'm done. And there's no time, I don't judge it. It just is what it is. And so I feel the more people can give themselves structure or give themselves flow and then actually be with themselves in what's true in the moment, the less we'll have this like compounding or inability to hold ourselves in what it is that we're feeling.
What resonated the most right now is, and it really was eye-opening how you described it, that if you don't have the capacity to hold your own emotions, you would want to give it to someone else. And so you just cry out about it and you just throw it like a ball to the next person that you can find, right? And sometimes it's your children, sometimes it's your partner. And I hope that everybody listening right now is catching that, because describing it in this way will really allow you to analyze yourself whenever you're doing that, right? And really hold back with that, because we can so clearly see how childish this kind of behavior is without judging ourselves harshly about it, because this is in the end also habitual, right? It's a learned behavior, how you have been raised as a little girl. How did your mom react when you had an emotional tantrum, when you had a problem and she just brushed it away? Oh, that's nothing, stop crying, or what did she actually do, right? And I think from all these experiences, and since parents oftentimes tend to become robotic, right, in their behaviors and how they respond to certain things, at some point they just shut down and they just do the same thing over and over again in their reactions. So you kind of have learned that as a girl, and then of course you will respond in a certain way to break out with all your emotions if you don't find the time to actually train yourself, and as you said, mature, like not only retrain yourself but mature really into a certain mindset, also into a certain way of thinking about yourself and managing yourself in a way that you don't blame other people for things, and you don't throw your emotions at random people, right? This is the kind of maturity that makes relationships really flow beautifully once you take that kind of responsibility.
Truly, truly. It like the key to being with your emotions in that way is deepening the relationship you have with yourself. And the relationship you have with yourself is deeply reflected in every other relationship that you have in the world.
And you use a certain technique that I would say goes back to language and neurolinguistic programming, if you will, when you sit in front of the mirror and when you talk to yourself, right? When you use actual language to reprogram or to program or to mature or to change certain things. And I know that in your work, language plays a big role. Can you go more into that, how you actually use that and what kind of results you have seen maybe with clients that impacted you the most?
Yeah, I studied hypnotherapy practitioner. I've done advanced now and I'm halfway through a diploma. And the reason I progressed with it was because I became really aware how programmable we truly are, and
Mm-hmm.
that we're really big computers waiting for someone to input data for us to like run that operating system. When we run stories on repeat, when we, and I'll use money for an example. If we are stretching ourselves financially and we start using the language, I can't afford or I'm too broke, and we repeat that again and again and again, it is programming that belief system into our subconscious mind, and we will embody being broke basically by not progressing financially. And so subtle shifts like it's not a priority for me right now. Like let's say your friend invites you to dinner and you know that you're on a budget because you want to invest in yourself, or you want to, spend $3,000 on some course that's actually going to move you forward in life rather than the instant gratification of going out to a meal with friends. And so if we can say it's not a priority right now, it shifts it to be like, well, I have money, I'm in abundance, but this instant gratification or this concert or whatever it might be is not my priority because I'm prioritizing X, Y, and Z. When we operate on like 90% in our subconscious mind. And it's why languaging is so important, because we're listening subconsciously more than we're listening consciously. And so it's been proven time and time again. If I say, don't think of a red truck, you'll think of a red truck, because that is how our mind works. So if we're continuing to say, I don't want to feel overweight, I don't want to feel broke, I don't want to feel X, Y, and Z, all our subconscious mind hears is broke, overweight, X, Y, and Z. So when we're speaking to ourselves specifically, or when we're having conversations, and you'll notice if you watch me talk a lot, and even potentially throughout this podcast, is I'll pause often before I respond, because I'm framing the intention with what I'm saying as much as I'm speaking the word. Even the way I talk about, trauma, for example, and it's difficult when people ask me to explain my story, but the way in which I've shaped my memory of my childhood has had profound impacts on my capacity to feel more whole, because I don't really label it as trauma as much as I can, rather than just stories I've told myself about the way in which I was brought up and things that happened to me as a child. Because any word that we repeat, we're re-imprinting. The biggest transformation I see in this is, we all have this mean girl, and, even the numerous work that I've done and the numerous modalities that I have, and, no matter how intelligent and self-aware I am, like, I still live in a society that programs me to believe that I'm meant to look 25 for the rest of my life, and I'm getting closer to 40, and I'm meant to have a flat stomach even after having a child, and all of this rules and regulations and expectations that are put on us. And so sometimes I've got to be with my mean girl. I've got to be with the part of me that says I don't look a certain way, or I don't, my body doesn't respond to exercise a certain way. And so for me, my mean girl shows up generally if I'm not at my ideal weight. And I truly notice a difference in my capacity to, and I don't really like the term lose weight because it doesn't, like, truly, it doesn't matter what we look like, it's how we feel. And for me, like, exercise and eating food is an extension of self-love. And so a surefire way for me to know whether I'm out of alignment with myself and I'm not truly in love is I start to eat bad and I start to not move my body. And for me, every time I wake up, it's like, if I loved myself, how would I want to move my body today? And if I loved myself, how would I want to eat today? And it's not, I love myself, so I'm going to eat chips because that's what my instant gratification wants. But I love myself so deeply that I'm going to forgo chips and the instant gratification of what they taste like, because I know how important health and vitality is to me. And that's more important than having a chip in this moment. And so the shift in the language is when I'm with my mean girl and when she wants to be like, you're fat or you're aging or you've got too many gray hairs or whatever that might be. And I shift it to, I love that you are giving me the gift of aging with grace through bringing to my attention all the places that this is stretching society, what society deems to be beautiful. And I love that you are in such deep relationship with your inner child that you just want to feed her ice cream all day because it tastes so good and it's so fun. And I love that you don't care what society says about how you're meant to look and, whatever it might be. And rather than dropping into shame or blame, if I can be in love and I can turn it back into like gratitude for what's been highlighted in my consciousness and highlighted in my existence, I eat cleaner and I move more. But if I'm in a pity party of like reinforcing through, I don't want to eat X, Y, and Z, or I don't want to feel lazy, or I don't want to get Botox or succumb to societal pressures in some way, I actually fixate more on what I don't want. And when I speak to myself in this reframe of what I do want, that's what I fixate on more. And so the biggest transformation in those senses, especially when I'm working with clients, is when I can gift them the reframes and there's something to focus on that is going to take their attention to what they do want rather than what they don't want, because we focus too much on the don't, but our subconscious mind doesn't hear the cue of don't. It only hears the sentence after that, basically.
You've just mentioned so many different and important aspects that so many women are struggling with when it comes to weight and how we look when we age, and especially when we are turning 40 and stuff. Me included, I will be 40 this year, and it is a different time frame. It is a different mindset, kind of. It is a different feeling, right, when you reach that kind of age. And I personally have to admit that I never really struggled with the pressures of society because I was always an outsider, was always alone, so to speak. I had friends here and there, but it was never that close that I could feel like I was in the society. I was always outside of the society. I grew up in Asia. This is one of the main reasons why I feel so alien to most cultures and societies. I don't even consider myself being connected to any country for that specific reason, because I'm kind of rootless, right? Has a negative and a positive at the same time. But what it allows me actually, and I struggled for a long time being an outsider, feeling like an alien. I thought it was a curse put on me, right? But as I moved out of the teen years, I understood what kind of a gift it actually is to see people in different cultures from an outsider perspective, not really being in the trenches of living those things and struggling through all of these things, but really being outside of it. And what I really noticed is exactly what you just mentioned, the tremendous struggles that women go through with weight loss, my mom included. I have watched her literally all my childhood struggle through weight and weight loss and how she tried to lose weight. And it was quite painful for me to watch because I know that there are different body types. And as a personal stylist, I have obviously more expertise now to confirm this, right? To tell her, listen, you don't need to look like a model, right? There are different body types. And it does not mean that you are fat just because you have broad shoulders or stuff like that, or if your bone structure is just built differently. And I think we need to bring more attention to the diversity of the humankind, of the human race, so to speak, as to how different people can look like without labeling them immediately as, oh, you're fat, right? I find that very horrible, right? And also the aging aspect, right? Whenever a woman goes into that type of age of 40, 50, like she's labeled as, okay, she's done. Right, she's off the market, so to speak. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, we're barely starting, right?
So many points I want to touch on here. I agree with the all shapes and sizes, and I feel there's a level of self-responsibility and deep self truth. I think there's this like element of which I've been with a lot in my journey because I was 110 kilos and I lost 40 kilos and that was purely an inside job. Weight loss, it actually has very little. I mean, energy in and energy out, yes, but it also has very little to do with exercise and diet and more to do with how we feel about ourselves. Because once we can get this self-love piece right, we don't actually want to like harm our body by what we consume. And we don't want to allow ourselves to, become like not strong or like, I didn't want to say weak, but like for me, I feel my most vitality when I feel strong, and I only feel strong when I exercise. I'm not going to achieve that by not investing in my body in that way. And it's a devotional practice to my body. It is literally like, I'm going to go pray for you at Pilates because I love you so much that I want you to feel the strength that you have. And I want you to feel that radiance by literally devoting to yourself in this way. And diet's a huge one, I feel, for women in their self-love and weight loss journey, is that if we're not feeling fulfilled in our life and if we're not feeling this love radiating from within ourselves, we tend to numb ourselves and to fill ourselves with something. And so we can tend to fill ourselves with food as a coping mechanism because we're not feeling fulfilled by life. And society wants us to think that the older we become, the more insignificant we are, because the older we become, the more wisdom that we gather, and our capacity to be able to break free of the system and to unshackle ourselves from societal expectations becomes more powerful. And what better way to disconnect younger generations from that truth and that power than to label older people as like being put out to die basically, or being irrelevant or not having wisdom to share.
And this is, by the way, something that I only observe in the Western cultures. Coming from the Eastern cultures, on the other hand, I have a very different mindset. Still, to this day, how much I respect older people is on a different level, how other people in the Western world see older people. And for me personally, it is a joy to get older because I know what it means. And it is less about how I look, because this is what I can control to some degree, right? It is my responsibility, as you said. I have a big part in this, right? How I look, whether I look younger or not, or whether I'm fit or not, which is more important to me than how I really look, right? But what it actually means to get older is so much more important for me than to stay young. And this is actually something that I've, on the other hand, struggled with. Because I was always looking much younger than I was, nobody was really taking me seriously ever since I was a child. And there was some really serious things going on in my mind ever since I was a child that I wasn't able to talk about it with nobody. Like everybody was like saying, "Who are you? You're like a child. Like that's ridiculous. Stop talking, you know." And the older I'm getting, the more I realize, and the older I look, I'm really looking forward to it, to look older, to look more mature, to be taken seriously by people when I talk about certain things that are really important in this life, and not just being seen like a doll or something, like something that you can use to accessorize yourself, for example, as a
Mm.
man or as whoever you are, right? Because women also tend to accessorize other women to just look more pretty in society, which I also notice in the Western society. And of course, it takes also a big leap into the Eastern world. But these two differences really give, or the view that I have of these two, let's say, rough, big worlds between seeing older people as something useless, and on the other hand, the how much respect people have for older people allows me to choose the better version that I want for myself. I want respect when I get older. I don't want to be dismissed because I look old or I cannot do anything anymore, right? So I would like to change that conversation in the Western world in general, because how valuable a person becomes with more years on their back, so to speak, with more knowledge, with more wisdom. Not that I don't respect children, because they bring a different energy, they bring a different capacity as to how they can teach us, right? This is a
Mm-mm.
different level. But I think this is missing, really missing. And there's too much shaming going on through all the beauty magazines, for example, and me being in that field as a personal stylist, for example, or a brand consultant is quite painful, to be honest, to see that kind of development, that it is not about health. And you said that it is really originally about health and how you see yourself. And it is not about the filters that we apply to our photographs to look prettier, or to all the magazines. Well, that looks all beautiful, but it is really not healthy how we act and how we do things.
My only comment on this is that women rooted in unshakable self-worth don't spend money in industries that thrive off women's insecurities.
Oh yeah.
So for me, what I rest in, I have only not gotten Botox for 12 months. I had Botox since I was 25 years old. It was like religiously I had it. And the more I awakened and the more I realized, I don't even eat seed oils. And so what it came to for me was like, if I love myself as much as I say I do, and I do, then what else is an extension of that love? And I stopped consuming anything with seed oils in it, like so much so that I won't have a latte when I go to a cafe if their milk isn't seed oil free. And so the more I sat on that, I was like, well, if everything I put in my body and everything I do or don't do to my body is an extension of how much I love myself, what am I reinforcing if I say I only love you if you don't have a frown line? And
Mm.
what am I enforcing if I say I only love you if I can't see your grays? And so to loop it back to this unconditional love as well, it's like, I think like also as being a beautiful woman, and I'm not afraid to say that, like so much value was put on that. Like so much value was put on like how pretty I could be. And there is this like almost like fuck you to everything and everyone that told us we aren't our full, powerful, beautiful, expressed selves if we don't look a certain way or we don't conform to a certain standard. And so it's almost been like this reclamation of my beauty for me, of like, actually, I'm beauty in the grace that I bring in my aging, and I'm beautiful in the wisdom that I bring that radiates from my soul and everything that I know. And so I think it's this permission slip to just like the raw authenticity in our natural beauty. Like I had like pitch black hair, but my natural color is blonde, and it's been a process to get blonde. Like so I'm really in this essence of like, how much can I truly be myself unmasked in the world? Like I'm wearing makeup because we're filming, but most days I don't wear makeup. I would say 90% of the time. I wear it now often in filming based on other people's perception, and I generally don't care. And sometimes you need to meet people where they're at in order to give them what they need. And so there's this element that sort of in the online space specifically that people expect you to look a certain way. I also actually, and I'm also going to call bullshit on some parts of that because I enjoy looking beautiful. There's nothing wrong with wearing makeup. I enjoy feeling beautiful. I enjoy feeling sexy. I just choose not to wear it often because my preference is to show up in the world unmasked. And to me, makeup can be a mask. Botox is a mask. Coloring your hair more than's necessary, or more like if you're using it to hide an aspect on yourself of yourself, feels like a mask for me. And so I've been in this process of like delayering and deconstructing all of these masks that I was told I had to wear to be accepted. And this like reclamation of beauty in this way has been, yeah, like a reclamation of my beauty in itself, of like, actually I'm not going to play by your rules, and I'm the most beautiful I've ever been, so fuck what you say. And I don't choose to play that game anymore.
And the different definitions also of beauty is so confusing, especially for younger girls nowadays. They don't even know what beauty really means. And I do work with that, honestly, and I try to do that on the most natural level to really uncover the natural beauty of a woman when I do my work, because that is the only level of beauty that she can trust, right? When we put on makeup on in our faces, and I love makeup myself, even though I'm not wearing any right now. And I, like you, I prefer to go natural ever since I have my kids, of course, because I also have discovered my beauty, right? And I don't need to confirm or conform to any kind of ideas of how I should be looking. But what I prefer to do is to look at myself and decide what is the most beautiful asset that I have. And how do I want to accentuate it in a way that it doesn't look like a mask? This is kind of
Mm-mm.
the way that I go also in my work, and a lot of women love this type of approach, especially when they are in their 30s and 40s, because they have children and they have woken up to that true beauty, because they know what is inside of them, what kind of true power lives inside of them to create life. And so they recognize all of a sudden who they really are. And this is kind of an awakening that's so important for many, many women. And the fact that so many are struggling with even calling themselves beautiful unless they have makeup in their faces, I find that very problematic. We need to change that narrative, because everyone is born beautiful. Everyone has a certain set of assets, I would call them, that make them beautiful. For one woman, it is her skin, right? That makes her just look stunning, right? For another woman, it's her eyes. Another woman, again, she has beautiful lips or hair or what have you, right? So everyone has something that they can accentuate. And that is much more important than to confine to a magazine standard, if you will. Even though you can do that, I also don't shame women if they want to be on a magazine, if they want to look beautiful. And I also can help them how to create the lighting, the background, the outfit, what kind of colors should you choose, color combinations, all that. There's no shaming on whatsoever level. And I think the most important part that you just mentioned is the reason why you're doing this. Are you doing this to grow on a personal level, to be on that magazine? Are you doing this to grow by taking off that makeup? Or are you doing it to prove it to someone? Like you said in the beginning, that you were so much in your masculine, in your business, that you were just trying to prove something, not to yourself, but more so to the outside world. And I think whenever a woman chooses to do something to prove to someone outside of herself, it will always be a mistake. And I would not recommend doing that. Now, you mentioned also breath work, which is one of the things that you also used to turn your business around, turn your life around. Can you walk me through how you used breath work and how you use that for your client work now?
Yeah, breathwork is one of the modalities that like cracked me open the first time and sort of allowed me to feel my emotions. We operate, as I mentioned, mostly in our subconscious mind. And I'm sure everyone listening and most people understand that our body keeps the score, and it's actually our nervous system that keeps the score. And so breathwork allows us to bypass our prefrontal cortex, our ego or our consciousness, and to get into our nervous system and to actually start to rewire at a physical level, not at a neurological level. The neurological change happens, but often our ego or our consciousness like blocks us from change because our consciousness would rather stay in a familiar hell than to shift into an unfamiliar heaven. And so what we're doing with modalities such as breath work is bypassing that ego, bypassing that prefrontal cortex or that critical faculty, and allowing us to drop into our subconscious and to do work with our nervous system and our subconscious mind to repattern some of these beliefs and to almost like loosen the grip that the story that we've told ourselves has on how we show up in the world. And so it's a really good way, like we're literally just breathing. It can be more effective than talk therapy. It's not as scary as psychedelics.
Truly.
And yeah. I mean, I play in both realms, but breathwork is like the gateway. Um, and it can be a gentle way to start to get into some of these emotions and into some of this stored story that we have about our lives and not have to like face it front on. Now, breath work can be really cathartic and it can be a very, well, everything's impactful, even the smaller sessions, but it can be overwhelming. And what we want to do when we're taking people through breath or if you're with a practitioner is to try to stay in your window of tolerance. Because if you keep blowing yourself out of a window of tolerance, so window of tolerance is like the space in which your body can hold stress. And so if you're breathing and breathing and breathing and you blow out of that stress tolerance or that window of tolerance, you can go into a highly charged emotion and you can almost like re-imprint trauma rather than release the trauma that you're trying to release. And so it's important to not like chase a cathartic release, because also sometimes if you're used to being in high emotion, you can chase the catharsis because you enjoy the dopamine that's released in those states. So breathwork is a great tool to actually access some of your stored story and like allow yourself to loosen the grip that it has on your reality. I use it often. So when I spoke before about when I feel emotion bubbling, and like I said, like I'm in such relationship with myself, like I can feel it. Like I feel the constriction in my chest, or I can feel an undercurrent of an emotion. And the second that it drops into my consciousness, assuming I'm home, and I'll give you a tool if you're out as well, but assuming I'm home, I'll go straight to my mirror, I'll sit on my mat and I'll just start breathing. And I will breathe into my heart space. Generally, that's where I'm feeling it. And I'll just breathe and I'll breathe deep. Now, often when we breathe into our chest. Conscious connected breath, which is the breath that's going to take you into your subconscious. It's actually breathing all the way down into your diaphragm and breathing all the way into your belly and allowing your belly to fully expand and fully contract and circulating that breathing. that is what will take you into your parasympathetic nervous system and into your subconscious. Oftentimes we breathe shallow and breathe into our chest. Now, I intentionally breathe into my chest to feel the emotion there, but if you're breathing for the first time, make sure you're breathing into your belly. And the secret, I guess, to like regulating your emotion throughout the day is witnessing where you breathe from, because it actually controls our capacity to be with stress or in our window of tolerance. So feeling any emotion is blowing us out of our moving us into a state that is, I guess, more uncontrolled. And so if we can consciously breathe throughout moments of the day, like make a cup of tea and be like, oh, am I breathing all the way into my belly, and just breathe a little deeper? Or be driving in your car and pull up at a set of lights and really connect to that conscious deep breath into your lower diaphragm, then it actually starts to allow us to regulate throughout our day so we don't get to a point of overwhelm or anxiety or burnout or whatever that might be. The tip that I was going to mention for people that if they're out and about, they don't have capacity to go to a mat and feel their emotion, is to take yourself to your car or take yourself into a room and just do some box breathing. So box breathing is breathing in a box motion. It might be to breathe in for 6, hold for 6, breathe out for 6, hold for 6, breathe in for 6, hold for 6, breathe out for 6. That's called box breathing. And even just bringing that level of consciousness or awareness to your breath can really help calm you and bring you into a more regulated state.
Yeah, and also starting depending on the level of practice that someone has done before, right? If a beginner, for example, they oftentimes don't even know where they are breathing, that they are breathing at all, right? I do have a lot of clients also when I do voice training that don't even notice that they are breathing or where their breath is actually going through, right? So for a beginner, it is really important to first notice a lot of things before they can start the box breathing. As I can imagine, for many who are just listening to this and hearing this for the first time, oh, what is breath work? I'm breathing, right? That should be enough. Like there need to be certain levels to start out without being overwhelmed, because as you said, when you're breathing the wrong way, you are accelerating to a level where you misunderstand the process and you say, oh, breathwork doesn't work for me, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
immediately the thing that you will get to hear, right? If they do it wrong. So
Truly.
start small, start in small steps. If you're just listening to this and this is new to you, start noticing. First of all, blow up your belly and feel that the breath is going into the belly, um, and breathe out. Actually, when you're breathing out, your belly should be flattening out, because many people do it wrong, right? They start the other way around. I don't know why, but this is something that I also noticed, the different mistakes that they can do there. And then start by 1, right? Breathe 1, breathe out 1, right? And take as much time as you want or don't have or have to move to the next stage without feeling pressured. Oh, I have to do the 6.
Yeah, truly, it could start at 4. It's just the awareness that you're bringing to your breath that actually allows you to regulate.
Yeah, many people dismiss this vital step because they think I'm already breathing. What should be there to it? And actually, I noticed in one of the Instagram posts about a health coach or something, someone was commenting. I feel very frustrated. He might be around the health space a lot, and he mentioned, oh, now I'm breathing wrong. What else, right? What else am I doing wrong here? Now I'm breathing wrong, right? Because the coach was also explaining breath work and how to do in the exercises and stuff. It can be very frustrating for
Mm-mm-mm.
people that especially men, I feel like they are a bit more guarded when it comes to that type of work, while women feel a bit more open to moving through that and growing. And I guess you have more women than as clients, right?
I do personally, but it's interesting. I find a lot of men tend to gravitate towards breath work and ice baths because It means I don't have to talk about anything. And it's a very, in a sense, it's a passive way of healing, because one of the beauties with breathwork is you don't have to revisit the memory or go into it. It can trigger memories, but it's not the objective. The objective is just to let the body let go without actually attaching story to it. So I do find a lot of men gravitate towards breathwork and ice baths because they don't want to do talk therapy. And there's still this cultural decision that men shouldn't talk about their feelings. So yeah, I find it's quite popular with men, and most of my clients are women. So yeah, it's an interesting space. Women want to talk about their feelings a lot more than men. Women want to be like seen and heard in that a lot more. And there can be so much medicine in women being received by a woman in what they're feeling, because often one of our biggest wounds is our mother wounds and our sisterhood wound. And so there can be such medicine in being heard in what we're feeling by another woman. And so women are more susceptible to want to talk things out, I find. And then yeah, a lot of men, breath work and ice baths because they get to skip the talking part.
Yeah, I heard that it's quite popular nowadays with all the celebrities doing it now and also pushing women to do it. I'm a bit careful when it comes to ice baths for women. I don't know why. I don't have a scientific whatever behind it, but my intuition tells me it's not good for women. What's your take on it?
There is science that backs this now. So ice bath does a handful of things. One of them is that it breaks our fear barrier. So it shows us that we can do difficult things, and it shows our mind that we can push through, like past this point of resistance that we can often feel in challenging circumstances. So it's good mentally in that way. Physically, it helps us reset our circadian rhythm. Now, women have both a circadian rhythm and their natural rhythms, and we shouldn't be in cold temperatures when we're menstruating or around our menstruation. Even in our, and I can't remember, I think our follicular. So the week before we bleed, basically, and the week of our bleed, we shouldn't be in cold temperatures. So there's only a 2-week window that ice baths are actually conducive to our health. And for the other 2 weeks, it goes against our natural cycles. And it can actually upset our natural menstrual cycle.
Mm.
So yeah, there is health benefits to it if we know where we're at in our cycle. And if we can do it when we're basically when we're ovulating is the ideal time for us to have ice baths.
Well, I will definitely research that a little bit more because it's so popular now. And one part of my brain says, "Ooh, there are health benefits," right? I'm always a nerd when it comes to healthy stuff, and the other part tells me, "No, it's not good. It's not good. Don't do it." Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your story, your wisdom. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for taking the time to ask such in-depth questions.